what I'm going to go over today in our session is all about EOC and the resources that we have available. Primarily, I want our HR representatives to be able to provide this information to employees, and also for you to know what resources we have for you to refer your employees to us if need be. So in this session, I'll talk about what we do in our office, the relevant laws. A lot of people ask, why would I go to EOC as opposed to human resources? So I'll talk about that. The primary policy that is sort of our guideline in this office is the UNC's policy on prohibiting discrimination, harassment, and other related misconduct. I'll also talk about ADA and reasonable accommodation. Accommodations not only for disability, but also for pregnancy, as well as for religion. And the religious accommodation policy is about a year old, but not a lot of people know about it. So I'll go over that, as well as talk a little bit about the compliance issues that we have in our office, which are directly tied to ADA and self-identification. Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right, so here is our office in a nutshell. What we do a lot of training and development for employees as well as students. For our employees, it's faculty training, EHRA, non-faculty training, as well as SHRA. It doesn't matter whether you're temporary or permanent, part-time or full-time. For the students, we have a lot of what we call awareness campaigns. So not necessarily training sessions, but awareness campaign. You'll see us out in the campus community with tables and flyers and pizza and, you know, different giveaways for the students. And we're trying to give them messages on safety and what to do and really what not to do. Hopefully these awareness campaigns will prevent them from being in our office. We also handle all of the reasonable accommodations for disability in our office. We have staff who are on the religious accommodation committee, including myself, and pregnancy accommodation. And there's a little, I won't say hiccup with that, but there's something interesting with that, but it is also handled out of our office, but we'll get to that. I'll talk a little bit about the Equal Opportunity Plan, or what is normally called the Affirmative Action Plan. Have you ever had an opportunity to read an affirmative action plan?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I actually handle that for the university. We also handle any type of relevant policies in regards to equal employment opportunity out of our office. If someone feels that they have experienced harassment or discrimination based on a protected status, that's all handled in our office, including the investigation. We have investigators here, probably about 5 or 6 investigators here who handle all of our investigations. I also have information regarding recruitment sources. If you have someone who is on a search committee and they say, you know, well, their position is underrepresented, but they don't know where to post their positions or what to do, we have available recruitment efforts. A lot of the information is about historically Black colleges, but also an extensive list of professional organizations by minority group, female, women, veterans, and individuals with disabilities. So that's sort of what we do in our office in a nutshell.
Okay.
All right, so some of the laws, here are some of the laws that we abide by. Some of them may impact HR, but I know HR, and my background is in HR, but I know HR is impacted by other laws in regards to employment, but some of them may sort of cover each other. But these are sort of our Bible of laws. Now, a lot of people, again, will say, well, why would I go to you as opposed to employee relations? And I tell them, if they feel that they have an issue and they're being harassed or discriminated on, and it's based on a protected status, they see us. But we all know that everyone doesn't behave appropriately. Sometimes it's not about protected statuses. If it's not about a protected status, then we deal with employee and management relations and HR. Now, sometimes we will work together. If there's a violence in the workplace issue, we'll work with human resources if it also has to do with the protected status. So sometimes you'll see us working together in that capacity. All right, pop quiz. Do you know the protected statuses?
Yeah, I mean, I do have to see religion, sex, nationality, let's see, what else?
Good enough.
Okay.
Age, 40 and
Yeah.
above, specifically about employment. Color. Now, what do I mean by color?
That'd be the color of your skin and not necessarily your where you originate from nationality wise.
Right. Skin tone, light skin versus dark skin.
Right.
Disability status, gender, gender expression, gender identity, genetic information, national origin, veteran status, race, religion, sex, and sexual orientation. So these are the protected statuses that are all governed by either state or federal law, and our policy covers protection of those areas. The policy also includes the related misconduct, which is the interpersonal or relationship violence. Our definition of interpersonal relationship violence is not just significant others, whether same sex or opposite sex, but it's also anyone who's in the household. So it can include roommates, it can include family members, those type of issues of violence. Policy also includes stalking and retaliation. Now, interpersonal relationship violence and stalking we typically see with the students, and because this policy covers students and employees, we have to have this in here. However, I tell everyone who attends our training sessions, if you know of an employee who is experiencing interpersonal violence or stalking, even if that other person doesn't work here, let them know that we do have protections for them, because we all know that type of violence doesn't stop at their address. And we want to make sure that they're safe on campus as well as the individuals who work with them. The policy also covers retaliation, and we'll go a little bit over that a little bit later. Okay. People ask, well, what's our definition of discrimination? Based on our policy, it's any unlawful distinction, preference, or detriment based on a person's compared to someone else based on their protected status, where it interferes with their conditions of employment, whether it's their hiring, firing, promotions, transfers, opportunities for training, any aspect of employment, as well as access to benefits or educational programs. That's more with the students. That would be acceptance into college, into programs, into graduate programs, advisors, recommendations, so any type of discrimination which would impact that. It is illegal to discriminate against anyone in any aspect of employment. And when we look at, well, what does that look like? We're looking at harassment. Harassment is a type of discrimination, and it's the action, whether that action is verbal, physical, electronic, or any other conduct based on that person's protected status. And in this area, we say whether it interferes in 4 areas: their work environment, academic environment, receipt of legitimately requested services, or participation in programs. And that's broken down into 2 types of harassment. Quid pro quo is the first one, based on an uneven balance of power. That is harassment or discrimination which involves someone who is in control of that employment process for that person, whether it's the opportunity to fire, give a bad performance review, switch them from first shift to third shift as punishment. And hostile environment harassment is everybody else. Anyone who does not have direct power over that person but can create that hostile environment. Any questions so far?
Yeah.
Okay. The policy covers complicity, and this was added to this particular policy because unfortunately we had supervisory staff who knew about harassment in the workplace and did nothing about it, so they were complicit. So this was added to it, primarily with supervisors if they know about these harassing behaviors or participate in it. Not purposefully, but maybe they laugh along with the jokes that someone says. That's considered complicity because they're adding to the problem. It also covers any type of retaliation whatsoever in the workplace, because either someone comes forward and files an allegation, the recipient of that allegation, or anyone who is brought in as a witness. There shouldn't be any retaliation whatsoever. And all of the parties are informed that if they feel that they are being retaliated, to let us know. Okay. Retaliation could be a couple things. It can be something that's very in your face, being told, if you tell anybody about this behavior, I'm going to terminate you or I'm going to move you. Or it could be something very subtle where the department meets every Friday for lunch. Now, all of a sudden, the department meeting is changed and everyone was invited except for that person. or opportunities where they got information before are no longer available to them as punishment for bringing something forward. All right, these are some of the training sessions that we have. Are you a supervisor?
No.
No?
No, I'm not.
Okay. So with supervisors, anyone who gets a supervisory or management position is required within 6 months of either being hired as a manager or supervisor or promoted into that position. They're required by the state of North Carolina to take the Equal Employment Opportunity and Diversity Fundamentals course. It is a course that is managed by the state, but we have about 4 people in my office that actually conduct that training on campus, as opposed to sending everyone down to Raleigh to take that session. So we have that here. Right now, for supervisors of first-line SHRA employees, there's a program called BEST, which is a mandatory supervisory training program for that level of employee. The Blueprint for Engaged Supervisory Training. Day 2 of BEST, and that's a 2-day program. Day 2 of BEST is the EEODF. And that includes 6 online modules as well as a full day of instructor-led training. We actually have that tomorrow. Our office also conducts preventing unlawful harassment and discrimination sessions on a variety of protected statuses, as well as training on ADA, Title IX, accommodations, religious, disability, and pregnancy accommodations, search committee training, which could include unconscious bias, and increasing self-identification when it comes to disability and veteran status. We have Haven training, which is safety for employees, and responsible employee and campus security authority training. So a variety of training by a variety of our staff members. And that is whether they sign up for training at OHR, or they come to lunch and learns, which are advertised at our office sponsors, or if there's an issue in the department, a director or division head may call us to talk about a situation and request specific training for a specific department. Usually that happens when there's an issue. And we'll come out and give these training sessions. We often do that. All right, accommodations, 3 types: disability, religion, and pregnancy. The accommodation process for all of them is a process where the employee is responsible for requesting the accommodation. Sometimes they are referred to us, say for instance, someone is out on a family medical leave, and we will be notified by OHR benefits that this person is expected to come back within 2 weeks. So it will be sent to the employee, and we may be CC'd with a referral letter to the employee saying, you're coming up on the end of your leave, you may want to contact EOC if you need a reasonable accommodation. When we get those, we'll follow up with the employee with it's my understanding that you may need this assistance, here's everything you need to know. But again, it's up to the employee to request an accommodation. That's for disability. No matter what type of accommodation, it is an interactive process where we're working with the employee, we're working with the supervisors or those that have a need-to-know basis to process this accommodation. It's not something that we just, without talking to anyone else, we approve it or deny it. Again, we work with the department. And it's individualized consideration. Each situation is going to be different, so we just can't say everyone who has this type of disability, this is your accommodation, because we have to look at that person's disability as well as what their specific job duties are, or what their specific job duties are and what time they're requesting off for religious accommodation. And even for students, if they're looking at religious accommodation, how will it impact the ability for them to perform effectively in their class, whether we approve it or not. Again, the information is evaluated and approved or denied either through our office or a committee where half of the committee is in our office. And I'll give you that information at the end. Okay, disability accommodation. If anyone who is an employee has a disability that impacts their ability to do their job, they're eligible to request a reasonable accommodation. And with this accommodation, they are expected to be able to perform the essential functions of their job. It's not going to get rid of them. It's not going to move them to someone else. With the accommodation, they should be able to do their job. Now, there are secondary functions that could be eliminated or terminated for a short period of time based on their disability, but with the accommodation, they should be able to perform their job. Who's covered? Pretty much everyone. All employees, part-time, full-time, temporary, or permanent. Applicants, if an applicant has a disability and they need an accommodation to help them through the application process or the interview process, we're required to put together a reasonable accommodation. Now, who's eligible also takes another step, because we have to define what a disability is. And a disability is defined in 3 ways. The first is an individual with a disability is someone who has a physical or mental disability or impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. Or it's a person who has a history or record of that impairment or disability. Or it's a person who has been perceived by or treated by others as if they have that impairment. Whether they have it or not, they've been treated as if they have a disability and there's a negative impact on them. Okay. Any questions about that?
No.
Okay.
I understand that. I'd never heard that part of it.
I know, interesting, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Is that the way that the law reads, or is that the way that UNC interprets it?
That is the way the federal government has defined a disability.
Okay.
And which is interesting because the majority of people do not know that.
Right. Or enforce it that way.
Right. Okay, so on to religious accommodations. Any member of the campus community who has a sincerely held religious belief is eligible and covered under our religious accommodation policy. The question then is, what is a sincerely held religious belief? It's defined as moral, ethical beliefs about what is right and wrong. It would not be the person who becomes religious so that they can take time off during the season of football just to watch football, okay? But it's a touchy-feely kind of thing because it's not limited to traditional religious beliefs or practices. So I tell everyone, do not make comments about what they think of someone's religious practices or belief that they feel is not legitimate or it's not real, because that can be considered harassment. Because it's not just someone who's Christian, Baptist, Catholic, Jewish, or Muslim. There are a lot of different, very diverse religions that you've never heard of. And if that person proclaims that they have this religious belief, they are covered under the policy. With pregnancy accommodation, there is a policy on pregnant and parenting students and applicants. The university does not currently have a policy for employees, but it is working on it. So it is in process. For permanent and temporary employees that are pregnant, there are pregnancy-related resources and programs that are available to them. And pregnancy-related disabilities are covered under ADA. So we don't have a policy on accommodation, but we have programs and resources that are useful for permanent and temporary employees.
I think I did provide you guys this information to the applicant or to the employee, but just with our campus being so spread out, are there, like, if they were needing accommodations for parking or for transportation or things like that as they get closer to their delivery date, would that come through you guys as well?
Actually, that specific aspect of it is through public safety.
Okay.
So any type of transportation or parking, no matter what type of accommodation, you have to go through public safety.
Okay.
And again, the university doesn't have an accommodation policy for pregnant employees.
Right.
And I'll talk a little bit more about that, I believe, on the next slide.
Okay.
But if an employee is pregnant, now, is pregnancy a disability?
No.
Great. However, there are pregnancy-related disabilities that are covered under ADA. So for instance, if a pregnant person has preeclampsia, or they're put on bed rest, or they developed high blood pressure because of their pregnancy, that disability related to pregnancy is covered under the ADA. And therefore they could request an accommodation for a pregnancy-related disability, but not just an accommodation because they're pregnant.
Okay.
Okay, now what are these programs? Of course, the parental leave policy. How long have you been here, Chris?
November 11th, so a little over 2 months.
Okay, so you heard about the parental leave policy that just came out.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the parental leave policy does exclude temporary employees. It is for permanent or I believe probationary employees. Actually, probationary employees. It's paid time off for eligible employees for their birth, adoption, foster care, placement, or other legal. So it's broken down into two types. The parental recuperative leave is only for the person giving birth. They get 4 weeks. In addition, they can have another 4 weeks for the second part, which is the parental bonding leave. So the person giving birth can have 8 weeks. The other parent can have 4 weeks of paid leave. However, in addition to that, they can use FMLA for the birth of their child. And in addition to that, for the pregnant mother, there is a lactation support policy. So it's not an accommodation, but it is a policy where the department is required, or the area is required, to have a designated space for that mother to express their milk and give them the time in breaks, or in break time, to be able to do that. So that's the extent of what we offer pregnant employees at this time. And there's a note at the bottom: faculty are not included in this because they have their own policy that handles it. Okay, so on to the Equal Employment Opportunity Plan. This is our AAP that we put together for the university. And I go over that because it talks about some of the data, personal data that we request from employees. The plan covers an analysis of every employee on campus that is in an active status, that is actively receiving a paycheck on October 31st of each year. It excludes postdocs or any employee whose primary reason for being here is either academics, or all of our student assistants are not covered, or an employee like postdocs whose primary reason is not academic, but it's to get that extra training based on their academics. That's postdocs. So everyone else is included in the plan. And this is an analysis of their sex or gender, race, ethnicity, veteran status, and disability to determine whether we are underrepresented by women or minorities in their job group in every division or school on campus. So that's the plan. And I talk about that because we talk about self-identification a lot. And over the last 5 years, employees are starting to see companies ask you multiple times, would you please, we invite you to self-identify and let us know if you're a person with a disability or if you're a protected veteran. And this is because of the guidelines from the federal government that were updated in 2014. So we are now required to ask that information, where in the past, companies couldn't ask that. But now we are required, and in some cases, with the ADA, we're required to ask that information 3 times, and we'll talk about that. So for ADA, we're required, and VEVRA, which is the veterans, we're required to ask employee or applicants if they are an individual with a disability or they're a veteran in the recruitment process, so applying for a position. For individuals with disabilities, we're also required to ask after we've offered them a job, but before they start work, so it's the new hire orientation if they have one. And then we're also required to ask every employee once every 5 years to invite them to self-identify as a person with a disability or veteran status. This data
are those requirements because we receive federal funding? Okay.
Yes,
okay.
because we're
so
federal contractors.
It's not yet for all employers. Right now, it's just for employers that receive federal funding. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Just wanted to make sure I had my laws right.
Okay, good. Very good. All right. So, and I tell employees, they'll ask me, a lot of employees are afraid that the data will go to their employer or to their supervisor, and
right.
it is confidential. And you'll see that in a minute.
Right.
All right. So one thing that I have found, and when these rules came into effect, we had about 1.5 years before we had to put ours in place because of the timing of our plan. But one thing over the first couple of years is that we had an extremely low number of our employees who actually self-identified, specifically as individuals with disabilities or veterans. But we still have issues with not gender, but race and ethnicity information. And what I did some research, And what I found is that a lot of people still believe that they are only disabled if they're in a wheelchair, visually impaired, or hearing impaired. And that's it. That's the definition of a disability. So I sort of went on a mission around the university to spread the word about what the true definition is. Okay, now it's doing interesting. All right. When I did this research, I found out there was a lot of misinformation. You know, being an HR person, that's my background, that's my degree. I knew for years companies couldn't ask you this information. That was discriminatory. And there's misinformation about what people think the information is used for and how it's going to impact their jobs. So there's a lot of missed opportunities for people to understand what we really need it for. And what I also discovered during that time was that 77 to 89% of our employees either said they are not going to tell us or they didn't answer it at all. So they did not know what it was used for. That is a huge impact of our employees. And we needed to get our numbers up because the federal guideline for individuals with disabilities and for veterans when it first started was 7%. The expectation was 7% of your employees in every job group. If they are individuals with disabilities, we are doing a wonderful job of decreasing unemployment for individuals with disabilities. When it started, it was also 7% for veterans. If you have 7% of the applicants are individuals who are veterans, then you're doing a wonderful job of decreasing unemployment for veterans. For individuals with disabilities, 7% has stayed the same over these last 5 years. For veterans, that number has slowly gone down each year. Right now, it's 5.9%. So if 5.9% of our applicants are veterans, we're helping to decrease. We're not there yet, though. We're slowly climbing, but we're not there yet. All right. So we talked about this, the 3 ways that you can be defined as a person with a disability. But the question still is, people still think I'm not one of those 3, in a wheelchair, hearing impaired, or visually impaired. So this is the definition. When we say physical or mental impairment that substantially impacts a major life activity, I go through this list with them and I'll say, okay, so what disabilities do you think would impact seeing, hearing, eating, breathing, and sleeping? What do you think, Chris? Pop quiz number 2.
Repeat that one more time.
What disabilities can you think of that would impact someone's ability in the area of seeing, hearing, eating, breathing, or sleeping?
Like neurological?
Yeah, neurological.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, plenty of, yeah, I mean, muscular, skeletal.
I'm not going to put you on the spot too much. I'm going to show you my next slide in a minute. But okay, I also want to point with the ADAAA, which is the ADA Adjustment Act or Amendments Act. It also now includes major bodily functions. So these are all those invisible disabilities.
Gotcha.
Okay, so when I go through this exercise in the training sessions, and I actually have people, you know, say what type of impairment or disability would impact this one or that one. I go through and sort of create a list, and here's a list, just to give you an example. And once I go through this and have people come up with these impairments, they realize, wow, okay, I have that and I never considered myself disabled.
Right.
I have that, wow, okay, anyone, and I'll say anyone who walks around with an EpiPen, because if you eat something that could put you into anaphylactic shock, that's a major life activity. Right. Anyone who walks around with a inhaler, emergency inhaler, that's asthma, that's a breathing impairment. So when you put it in this frame of mind, more people are understanding, wow, I'm an individual with a disability, if you look at it this way. And I also have them understand that what we do with the data. And the question is not, do you have a disability that impacts your job? That's still an assumption. Nowhere on the question does it say, do you have a disability that impacts your job? If we're talking reasonable accommodation, completely separate process. But when we define disability, it's major life activity and major bodily function. So when they look at it this way, there's a better understanding. The question also says, do you have or have you ever had a disability? So it's providing this information to people who think, well, I used to have this years ago, but I'm not disabled now. The definition from the federal government is, do you have or have you ever had a disability? If you can say yes, they want you to check the box. That's it. So with that information, and now rethinking what the definition of a disability is, more people can understand they're part of that team. These are the people that we want to go ahead and select that box. That lets us know that we have a higher percentage of people with or who have had disabilities in the workplace. But it takes time to get that message out. Also, when it comes to self-identification, I wanted to let people know when you self-identify, what it does and what it doesn't do. It is confidential. There are 4 employees on this entire campus who have access to the disability information. And they're all in my office, and I'm one of them. This information is only used for the affirmative action or equal opportunity plan. Even HR people, you guys don't have access to this at all. Okay. Again, it's used only for the plan. It's not tying any employee to any department other than data percentages. We are not going to ask you when you self-identify, we're not going to follow up and ask you, well, what is your disability? It is not automatically requesting a reasonable accommodation. That's not what self-identification does. Completely separate process. And it's not going to place you on the new disability and veteran listserv. So you'll get all information about disabled people and veterans. This is not what it does. So I like to tell people, when you self-identify, this is what you can expect. Instead of assuming it's signing me up for a reasonable accommodation or it's going to my supervisor. When we talk about self-identification, you can go on Connect Carolina and self-identify. Again, it's confidential even when you do it this way. This is the question. Do you have a disability or previously had a disability? No, I do not have a disability, or I don't wish to answer. But we really want you to answer something. Same thing with veteran status. These are the questions. And ethnicity, it breaks it down a little bit more, but I ran out of space on this page. So we ask that you go ahead and self-identify because it's used for purposes of federal requirements and guidelines. All right, coming to the end. Myths about our department: that we investigate every allegation of discrimination and harassment. Nope, that's not true. Sometimes we have initial investigations. Sometimes when we sit down and speak with someone, there's not enough information to have a productive evaluation or investigation. Sometimes people make false allegations, and it's easily seen once you do a preliminary. We don't just do investigations of Title IX. We do a variety of investigations under our purview. And then some people think that all of our investigations are not confidential or private. There are individuals who are on a need-to-know basis, so it can't be strictly confidential because we do have to do things with this information. Now, one thing, unfortunately, some employees who do file and have an investigation, they file it, they want to know exactly what happened at the end. They'll have an overview, but they want to know, well, what punishment does this person have? And we can't tell them that because that part of it is confidential. We can tell them that it will be righted, but we can't tell them the details of what's going to happen to that person. Resources that are available. Confidential resources include the Ombuds Office, the Employee Assistance Program, and the Gender Violence Coordinators. But here's also just resources that are available for our office and employee relations in the central office. Now on to accommodations. Contacts for religion. If someone requests all of this is on our webpage, first of all, and all you have to do is go to accommodations. If someone wants to request a religious accommodation, it's an online process and it's reviewed by a committee, the Religious Accommodation Advisory Committee, and I'm a member of that. But you can simply request one online. Pregnancy accommodations for students, go to Elizabeth Hall. ADA accommodations, you can call our main line or send the request to Rudy Jones, Elizabeth Hall, or myself, but it's all out of our office. If someone wants to make a report of harassment or discrimination based on a protected status, we have an online reporting form, as well as here's the information where they can simply call and speak to a report and response coordinator or director of Title IX or EOC office director. They can come to our office. We are in a new location. For those of you who are not new, we're at 214 Cameron Avenue, over by, let's see, the Halal Center is next door to us, but we're also right in front of the dorms and down the street from the fraternity houses. Or you can simply call our main line and ask to speak to someone if you want to talk to someone about making a report. Okay. Any questions?